Alright, let's do this. So the last time I did this at the start of season I got slayed, but I'm just going to put a disclaimer here. This is a theory build. This is my theory. I don't know what the patch notes are going to be yet. But we know that melee is getting buffed. So fundamentally, we can assume that while my build is not going to be 100% bang on, it's going to be pretty close. And this is simply just me theoretically theorizing about what I'm actually going to build in the new season. I'm pretty sure, based on the numbers that I'm pulling together out of Path of Building, that this could potentially work, and if not be significantly better than what I've actually calculated as a baseline. But we'll see how that goes. So fundamentally, what I've got open in front of me here is the old sweep gem, which I'm hoping that they revamp. They probably will, fingers crossed. But essentially, I want to bring back #1 sweep, and I want to bring back the Berserker, which nobody plays at this point. And I also want to bring back the use of Gruthcool's pelt, because I think I may have found a useful way to actually utilize this. So let me get into a little bit about what this is about. So essentially, sweep, you're going to swing your huge fuck off axe around a whole shitload of times, and you're going to hit everything around you. That's fundamentally the whole goal of this build. But we're actually going to use the new rage statistics, and we're also going to use bleed, because we're going to go solely melee. The problem with Gruthcool and most other builds is that there is absolutely no ability to use spells. They're disabled. That includes auras like heralds and whatnot. So we're actually going to run a heraldless build. We're going to run a completely auraless build and do complete 100% blood magic, just for the lols, and just for something different, because it gets boring playing the meta build all the time. Anyway, the basic logic of this build is we're going to run sweep, and we're going to run bleed. That is essentially what we're going to do, and we're going to run it on the Berserker. And there's a reason why I want to run it on the Berserker. It's fundamentally because Berserker #1 gets rage, which is this Rite of Ruin, which I don't think anyone really uses, but it's pretty cool when we actually start looking at it. So the effects granted by rage are doubled. Now, I had a quick look at these stats, and I'm calculating off the base, but yeah, I actually think this is a lot more powerful than I had initially calculated. Potentially not, but I'll calculate it using Crave of Slaughter, but yeah, okay. Anyway, going into the reason why these are important. So Rite of Ruin gives you doubles the effects of having rage. Now the effects of having rage, and I'll bring open my my spreadsheet that I've got running in the background here, that I put together and did some basic calculations on. So essentially, the effects of running rage are this. You can have a max bonus of 50 rage. I'll just make this a little bit bigger so that we can all see what I'm doing. You can have a max rage of 50. Okay, so essentially each bonus of rage you get 1% damage and 0.5% increased attack speed. You also get movement speed, but it comes at a penalty. You get a 0.10% life loss per second. Now, we're not so worried about that in this instance, because we're going to be leeching like crazy, man, because one of the other benefits of running a Berserker build is this Cloak Savagery, which gives you essentially increased leech. 100% of damage leeched as life if you've taken savage hits. It also gives you Pain River, which gives you essentially a lot more leech, pretty much in every way, shape and form. But we're going to beef this up and take leech nodes as well. So not only have we got leech to compensate for our decline in health, but we're going to get a total max bonus of 50% increased damage and 25% increased attack speed. Now, most builds use Aspect of Carnage. What I've actually found is if you run Crave the Slaughter, you're going to make 10% increased DPS over the top of this. And on top of that, you're actually going to make a 25% increase attack speed buff. So it actually makes more sense to play Crave the Slaughter when you really think about it, because the stats really talk for themselves, the numbers talk for themselves. Like we're looking at this now, these rage calculation bonuses are here. So rage, 50 top rage being top. Rage is accumulated by killing enemies, or a 10% chance to gain rage when you hit a rare or unique enemy. Now the flip side of this is we can run the Warcry node here and really beef this up and get, I think you get 5 rage if you go Warbringer. You get 5 rage when you use Warcry, but you're going to get rage either way. You shake it when you run Crave the Slaughter, so you really don't need to run that in this case. I think we'll be leeching enough that we won't even need to worry about that. So back to the numbers. Essentially, I've done a bit of a recalculation because PoE, Path of Building, doesn't really take into account certain things like, for example, this rage calculation or rage multiplier bonus is what it doesn't factor into our base calculation of DPS. Now, I'll go through the nodes shortly and the items that I actually am suspecting that I'll use. But at this point, the total DPS based on the base is 66,797. This is based on an average DPS of 13,801 with an attack rate of 4.84 based on the gems that I've stipulated and based on, I guess, the gearing and of course the gems. Now, the gearing's not by any way, shape or form complete or accurate or anything like that. It's simply just basic gear, basic uniques. When we've got 2 steel rings on there with no stats or attributes. So this is we don't have a helm, we don't have boots, because obviously I'm theory crafting this, so I don't really know what I'm going to get as far as drops. I will say most of those stats, boots and everything will be boots, helm and belt will be resist gear. And health, so it'll stack health. The other benefit of this is there's a lot of health, but we'll go into that very shortly. So we're running, I think it's not unwavering. What's the stance called? Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this shit. So we're running resolute technique, so we're not going to crit strike. Now I know there are builds with bleed that crit strike. I don't think it needs it on this. We're going to go face tanking Berserker with rage, so we want to have plenty of sustain and we want to be consistent. So my build is going to have resolute technique, but anyone else can do anything else they want. So going back to the stats, so basically we're going rage multi of 50 based on the attributes per rage multi. So if we go 50, so it's 50 times 1%, obviously 50 times 0.5%, and we get 10% increased movement, so we get some fast bonus shit. So 50 times 0.2%. Now I haven't calculated the this, but that would be 5% life lost per second. So if we can leech more than 5% of our health back, which we will be easily able to do that, then that will mitigate that. Plus we've got health regen too, so that helps too. So multiplying that out, we get an average DPS of 20,701, which is the 13,000 times 50% increased DPS. And then we have an increased attack rate of 6.05, which is 4.84 times an additional 25%. Now, this calculation could be wrong. This could be 25% of the base. I'm calculating it based on the attack rate that it's telling me with every other stat. So this could be included in here on the base, which would change this calculation altogether and it would be less. But this is just a broad range calculation. So with 100% hit chance, we're calculating 125,000 DPS. Now this is an incomplete build, and as far as gearing and whatnot goes and gemming, so dual sockets, so already this isn't too bad. This can be really pushed up with the right gear, the right items, some respecking in the tree into more better utilized attributes. So also I have bleed DPS calculating out at 8,000. So if we go to the calculations tab here, we have bleed DPS, which is 100% chance to bleed, so there will always be bleed, and that's including hemophilia and at series disfavor, the Valax, and I believe it's including the Crimson Dance. Now, if we have a look at this 751%, it's including, I think it's including Crimson Dance, or is it not including Crimson Dance? I don't think it's including Crimson Dance. So Crimson Dance is essentially a bleed buff node in the tree, which is, it basically gives you the ability to stack 8 times, bleed 8 times on a single enemy. Now there are things that stop things like enemies moving, the bleed will stop, and it's 50% decrease in bleeding. Now, I actually think that 8 stack hasn't been calculated. So if we look at that, if we look at 8659 as a bleed stack, and we go multiply by 8, we're going to get about 69,000 per second, as long as the enemy doesn't move. Now, I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if that's how Path of Building calculates it, and please write it in the comments if you do know how it calculates it, but I'm leaving it as the base right now. It's not great. Now, at 16,000, it's not great either, but if we factored in that multiple of 8 stacks, then we end up with something like 129,000. Now, that could be correct. It may be completely shit and absolute bullshit. Who knows? Well, I guess whoever, you know, the guy who made Path of Building knows the answer to this. But Path of Building doesn't factor everything in, which is where I have some issues. So if we basically look back at Path of Building, I'll go through the path that I'm opting here, and I'll put the paste bin for this in the comments as well, or in the description. So essentially, we're just doing a basic Marauder build. We're going to come down on the health nodes here. We're going to get to Warrior's Blood. We're going to go up to Heart of the Warrior, into Born of Fight, and we're going to go across into Barbarism. Now, we're not going to pick anything up. We're not going to go up here either. We don't need intelligence for this build. We're pretty much using no intelligence nodes. We're going all strength. Then we're going to come out here, pick up Resolute Technique. We're going to get Indomitable because that's going to reduce critical strike damage and increase our armor. We don't have a lot of armor on this build too, which is a little bit of an issue, but we'll deal with that with mitigating health and leech. Next thing is we'll go get Devotion, we'll get Sanctity, and we'll move up through to Amplify. Also, as an additional, now I would do this last, we'll get Martial Experience. And this is just going to increase our attack speed. It's going to increase the effect of, well, we're not going to deal ailment damage, but it is going to increase our damage overall, which is what we sort of want. So when we come back here, back down to this side, we're going to go to Cleaving. We're going to get Slaughter. That increases axes because we're going to use a two-hand axe. We're going to get Juggernaut and pick up health nodes. We're going to get a dual socket as well. We're going to move down and pick up Blood Magic. That's important. We're going to get Mortal Conviction. This is going to push our health pool up. We're going to pick up this Red Storm node because we want bleed and physical damage. We want Bloodless. Enemies not being able to leech from us is good, and it gives us, what, 13% increased health in just those two nodes. We're going to come down, pick up Crimson Dance. We're going to pick up Hematology. Hemotophagy. Oh, however you fucking pronounce it, I don't care. Then we're going to get Executioner, we're going to get Wrecking Ball, up into Golem's Blood. We want to pick up this third dual socket. We want to pick up Splitting Strikes, Bloodletting, and then up into Master of the Arena and Art of the Gladiator. The reason why we want this will give us increased damage with bleeding. So bleed is going to continue to do more damage, and we want to focus on that and our physical damage. That's pretty much the only two stats that we're focused on, and health and a bit of health regen and leech. That's all we're worried about in this build. It's really simple. Essentially, that's the tree. There's nothing to it. Now, the key nodes here are obviously Blood Magic means we can't use mana, which is fine because we don't need mana for this build. We want Crimson Dance because we want to stack bleed 8 times. That's going to do a huge amount of fuck off damage, and it's going to drop bosses really quickly. We want Hematophagy, blah 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 blah, because it's going to increase our life leech rate, and it's also going to increase our leeching damage while leeching. Now, I don't know if damage while leeching in this program gets factored into the average calculation of DPS, and we'll see why my theory about that is very shortly. Now, picking up Splitting Spikes is going to give us an increased amount of leech based on attack damage, which is something that we want. And obviously our other nodes are just increasing our DPS. It's very straightforward. So if we look at skills, essentially I've just theorized one skill being Sweep, which is what I'm going to be using. We may have, you know, a fortify buff on, for example, Leap Slam or a new movement skill. We may run Cast on Damage Taken and have something like, you know, maybe Phase Run as well as Immortal Call. We're going to have that, but we're not going to have any auras, so it doesn't really matter. Nothing else is going to push our DPS up too much aside from this and any other minor melee physical damage attributes. So essentially we're going to run sweep, or we're going to run melee physical damage, brutality, because we're not going to be doing any chaos or elemental damage. We're just going to focus on bleed and physical damage. This is going to hugely increase our physical damage. We'll run Ruthless. Now, the calculation of DPS in this program doesn't account for the third strike of Ruthless. It somewhat calculates it, but I think it averages it out. Now, the beauty of that is every third strike you're going to go up 113% with sweep, and we're going to be doing 4.7 up to 6 attacks per second, which means, you know, we're going to be doing 2 ruthless strikes every second, fundamentally, is what that starts saying. 1 to 2, 1.5 to 2. So that's going to be pretty awesome. We're going to run multi-strike because we need attack speed, and that's going to give us a huge fuck-off amount of attack speed, and chance to bleed is going to give us more damage with bleeding, and we want to do as much bleeding damage as we can because we want to multiply that out by the 8 stacks. So that's important. So that's pretty key to this build. And then obviously items. Right now I'm saying at Series Disfavor, Devoto's Devotion, and we're going to run Gruthkull's Pelt. Hemophilia Gloves, because essentially when enemies die, they explode, and that does 5% of their maximum health as physical damage. Now there are negative attributes like 25% reduced bleed duration, etc., etc., but it's also going to do 33% increased attack damage against bleeding enemies. Now again, I don't know if that actually factors into the calculation, so I've done an additional calculation for that, and I'll bring the spreadsheet over soon. Carnage Heart is also another one. It's going to give us elemental resist, it's going to give us increased leech and leech rate, which is what we want. So 50% increased life leech per second is huge. And also does 35% increased damage while leeching. Now I don't know, again, if Path of Building actually factors that into the average calculation. It doesn't appear to look like that when I look at the breakdown of the 741%. It doesn't actually say Carnage Heart in that window there in any of these stats. So what I'm actually assuming at this point is that Carnage Heart doesn't factor in, and Hemophilia doesn't factor into the average DPS calculation. So basically on my spreadsheet here, what I've done is I've adjusted for the 35% top damage of Carnage Heart and 33% increased attack damage while bleeding for Hemophilia Gloves, which the potential, if I calculate that off the total DPS based on the rage stats, so not based on the original base, then I end up with a calculation of an additional 43,000 and an additional 41,000 damage. Now that could be the wrong base calculation. Maybe I need to calculate it off the 66,000. But that gets me up to 210,000 DPS, total DPS, when it peaks. Now, again, I don't know if that gets buffed up in every third strike by Ruthless, which would be crazy. But basically what this is saying to me is this potentially is calculating up some pretty crazy DPS. Now the other thing is, does bleed damage scale off of this? Because this is increasing attack damage. Now bleed damage, as far as I'm aware, scales off attack damage. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know until I actually build this build and see if it fails or it passes the test. I'm pretty sure it'll work. I don't know the answer to that. So we'll find out. Other things that we should be aware of in this build is number 2. Aside from everything else, we actually have a health pool of 4,784 life. So we have an 191% bonus in our health pool from our tree, which is not accounting for health stats on rings, health stat on helmet, health stat on boots or belt. So if we run all resist on our boots belt, and we get that on our rings, then that's going to significantly increase this pool anywhere up to 7,000 HP. So that's fairly good. Now the weak area is resistances, which we'll have to address when we actually look at belts and boots and rings, which is probably what we're going to craft, and also body armor, because again this doesn't include body armor. Oh no, it does. Sorry, Gruthkulls. I didn't even think about that. Also flask damage, I haven't got any flasks in here either, and I haven't got any jewels in here either. So Depending on what I run, I don't think Watcher's Eye is a good pick on this build. I think just standard Crimson Jewels will work perfectly with the right stat attributes. But we can get resistances on those, and we can get health on those, so that's going to increase that further. So all in all, I would say, obviously Elite Rate is 1243.8. Now that'll increase if we get a ring with, if we get a steel ring with, not Assassin's Mark, what was it? Warlord's Mark, then that will beef this up even more. Now we also have 497.5 health regen per second, which is pretty cool, and a 32 radius, which I'm not too sure what the scaling is, but I think that's quite sufficient actually. Now armor's a little bit low, but we have 16% physical damage reduction. We also have evasion rating as well from the tree. Now that may help us. Now we're not including armor off other items, so depending on what your boots and what you're not going to get armor off your belt. Depending on the armor you get off your boots, and whether we actually run a Devoto's devotion is another, I guess, factor to factor into this. Anyway, long story short, I think this is a good baseline for a sweep build coming into the new season. Now this will completely change. Well, it won't completely change. I don't fundamentally think the logic of this will significantly change now and in 16 days when the expansion comes out. I think this is a pretty solid way to build this this character, to be completely honest. If anything, we could drop off these nodes and we could pick up these. This is factoring in 114 points, so this isn't max built, so this gets it up to what, 90, 91, 92, something like that. So I actually think this is quite viable, and I'm actually going to use this build. Now, I guess I'll do a build guide when I actually do it, but this is a theory guide, so I want to stress that it's a theory. I don't know yet if this is 100% going to work. I think it probably will. I think it'll work quite well. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to fall down the armor department, and you know what? I could get one hit. Don't know yet. It's Path of Exile. Who knows? What I do know is this will be quite fun to play, and it'll be different because no one hasn't really played sweep builds for a long time because melee hasn't been a huge thing. Sweep is a really fun build. I remember playing it when I first started playing, and I had a lot of fun. Now, they were big up until about, I think, patch 2.4, 2.7, something like that. Or they were being used at least, because they got patched up to 2.4. I'm pretty sure it was the last time it got patched. If we have a look at Sweep, when was the last time? 2.6 was the last time it got patched. So, yeah, I think it's something different. It's something new. Now, will this build work on other classes? You could probably get the Scion to play this build. You're not going to get Assassins to run this build sufficiently. You definitely could get the Champion to run this build very easily. Sorry, the Duelist. With, I think, the Slayer build would actually run this quite well. Because of two-handed weapons. Obviously, with Sweep, you require a two-handed weapon. Anyway, if this has helped you get some ideas about what to do, if my calculations are wrong and you want to slay me in the comments, go to town. I invite you to do that. But otherwise, if this makes any sense, like and sub. If you want to see more from me, like and sub. Yeah, and I'm open to any constructive hate that you want to put in the comments. Go crazy. But anyway, until next time, thanks a lot for watching, and see you all later.